I've got to hand it to a developer like Warhorse Studios. Not many devs have the guts to try and make a somewhat historically accurate RPG set in Bohemia in the early 15th century. And yet they've done just that with Kingdom Come Deliverance, which has recently been released for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and of course Microsoft Windows. At times it feels like one of the best RPGs I've played in recent memories, and at other times it's a horribly bugged, glitchy, technical mess. So you're playing as a guy named Henry, the son of a blacksmith living in the peaceful village of Skalitz, home to a silver mine and led by the charismatic Sir Radzig.
You still have a lot to learn.
During the prologue, which runs the better part of 3 or more hours, Skalitz is attacked by Czech soldiers, the town is ransacked and Henry's parents are killed, causing him to flee to the nearby town of Tarnberg. With the aid of the Lord of Tarnberg and the assistance of Sir Radzig, Henry then hunts down the people responsible for the death of his parents, and tries to retrieve the last sword his father made before his death, which has been stolen by bandits. Now truly where this game really excels is when it's telling its story. When you're watching one of the game's many cinematics or just interacting with characters and finding out what kind of person they are and what their motivations are. Some of the dialogue in the game is really well written and voice acted pretty well too, though the odd voice here and there doesn't fit with the character it's portraying. But nonetheless, it's pretty good stuff.
Is he hiding under the table, maybe? No! Then what he wants isn't worth a fart in a bathhouse.
There are scenes where you'll quite honestly laugh out loud at some of the interactions, and then there's others that really pull on the heartstrings. One of the highlights I think is a quest where Henry hangs out with a priest and the two end up getting super drunk and up to no good. And this quest line where you're chasing the tail of this pretty young village girl is also pretty cool too.
Shouldn't we spread the linen out?
Henry, hush now.
I think what makes it so interesting is because it's honestly like really believable stuff, like these feel and act like real people and they show actual emotion. Cinematics are presented like you're watching some kind of TV show with tension and actual drama in comparison to other games, where often story-crucial scenes of dialogue are just delivered by talking heads. And it's all helped along by this phenomenal orchestral soundtrack.
God be with you, my friends.
We'll wipe those whore sons off the face of the earth.
There is a really captivating story here too. I mean, I'm not going to be a pretentious dickbag and suddenly pretend like I have some kind of extensive knowledge of medieval Europe, but the story involving counterfeit coins, Turkish mercenaries and this marauding Bohemian king is pretty intriguing stuff. It's a super long campaign too. Even after 30 plus hours of playtime, I still haven't finished the so-called main storyline. And the map is just covered with side quests for me to complete as well. Now look, the RPG element of the game works pretty well. There's the expected stats like strength, agility, vitality, all that kind of stuff, and you can specialize in swords, axes, bows, and then there's other non-combat oriented skills as well, like alchemy, herbalism, and funnily enough, you can also specialize in drinking alcohol. So on that RPG side of things, Kingdom Come is amazing and it lets you do whatever the hell you want to do.
So, let's see you read a bit.
Once you finally get your first horse, the world is pretty much your oyster, and exploring it and seeing what it has to offer is something the game does very well. You can be a total hero to the common folk and people are going to exclaim in joy as they see you walking through their town, or you can be a total dick, steal their stuff and you'll be scorned instead, and the choice is entirely up to the player. You'll help a town plagued with water poisoning, you'll investigate bandit camps, you'll solve a murder, and it just keeps going on and on. At one point, you even go undercover in a monastery to interrogate someone who's in hiding and forced to carry out mundane chores until you find them. Okay, you know what? Actually, that one's not fun at all, and I think it'll be more interesting to be a monk in real life than do it in this game. But most of the other quest requirements are pretty unique and fun to carry out, and it's not always just a matter of go here, kill someone, or go here and grab this item, then come back. But then there's the combat. Let me put it like this, do you want to engage in fast-paced, brutally violent sword fights with enemies? Do you want to chop someone's head off, stab them through the chest and watch blood spray from their wounds? How about dishing out devastating combos, turning your weapons into a flurry of steel? You do? Well, go play something else, because the combat in Kingdom Come is nothing like that. Taking something more of a realistic approach, not that there's anything wrong with that, the combat in this game is much more slower and methodical. It's more like a game of chess than a game of dodgeball. Now, I only really used swords in the 30-something hours I spent with the game before making this video, but I don't think the speed of the combat's going to differ all that much for the other weapons. I mean, if anything, I think combat with a mace or a polearm is going to be even slower. So the way it works is you can attack from 5 different angles with either a slash or a stab move. You can parry an enemy's attack if you time it right, and when the game lets you, you can perform combos as well. Though I say that because combos can be pretty temperamental, and a lot of the times it seems your opponent can often parry the second or third strike if you're too slow. I've had fights that lasted 30 seconds, and I've had other fights that went on so long that day transitioned to nighttime and I had to pull out my torch to see where my opponent was. I think the shoddiness of this system though has been a little bit overstated. I mean, it's a little bit clunky, but it's definitely not bad, despite how janky it can often feel. I think the main issue is that the feedback you get from connecting a strike with an enemy is just very low. You don't really get that much of an idea if you're really hurting someone all that much until they either surrender or they comically ragdoll to the ground dead. Enemies you fight seem to be either complete idiots who don't even know how to hold a sword, or instead it's like you're fighting Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones, and they're able to pretty much block, parry, and otherwise avoid everything you throw at them. If the combat's too tough, you can always cheese out opponents by pulling out your bow and just shooting them in the head a couple of times. Enemies never seem to be able to avoid arrows, and they're just going to run right up to you like a complete idiot, even when you've got an arrow drawn. The other issue is that whilst combat is fine against, maybe 2 or 3 people, in larger numbers it just becomes really shoddy because the targeting lock-on system, or whatever you want to call it, is just very finicky, and it doesn't really work all that well moving between multiple targets. I think one of the reasons too why the combat's been given such a bad reception is that it really does take a pretty long time to master. During the first few hours of the game, there's fights where I honestly think it's scripted for the player to lose, and it takes a really long time until you truly feel like you're becoming good at combat. It makes sense though from a narrative point of view, because at the start of the game you're just some stupid kid with a sword. There was one mission though where I was getting smoked by like 2 or 3 bad guys and I just couldn't beat them, so I went away for a bit, I leveled up, learned how combos worked and practiced a bit with a nearby trainer, then I went back and beat the shit out of them. And sometimes in this game you're just simply not going to be able to progress, and you're just going to have to suck it up and come back later when you're not a complete scrub. Gotta say that I'm not fond of the fact that you're often forced into combat or stealth for certain story missions. Like say you've gone for a speech and charisma build over combat for instance, which has gotten you by fine, but then there's certain key campaign missions where you have to fight. The save system is the worst mechanic by far. Now the game uses manual saves, which is fine, but to do this you need a potion called a Savior Schnapps, which lets you save whenever you want as long as you're not in combat. Problem is they're really expensive to buy early on, and to get the recipe to craft them is also expensive, not to mention tedious. Otherwise you can rely on the game's autosave, which is easy enough to forget about, and there's been numerous times when I've gone maybe 30, 40 or even 50 minutes without a save. One of the last missions in the game has you recovering from injuries before heading north for reinforcements to storm a bandit camp, then storming that camp and killing dozens of bad guys without a single save the entire time. All up, that took me roughly an hour to accomplish. Now that's an hour of progress that could have been lost if I was killed, or worse yet, if the game crashed. I mean, that's just rubbish. The alternative to praying for a merciful autosave is sleeping for a long period of time, which can kind of throw off things a bit though, because the time of the day is sensitive to the quests you're often doing, making NPCs unavailable at certain hours or just outright failing certain quests. I mean, part of what makes RPGs so much fun is the experimentation element, and if the penalty for trial and error is a 30-minute step backwards, well, there's not much sense in the player buggering around with the game's mechanics and trying to explore what they can and can't get away with. People who say this save system is fine and go on about how realistic and immersive it is, I think are overlooking the fact that you're drinking a magic potion that somehow saves your progress. There's nothing realistic about that. Don't give me that shit.
The peachy!
And then there's the laundry list of technical problems, and at times this game is just an absolute disaster. For starters, I can't even change my graphics settings without the game crashing. Moving into new areas, the game takes a while to load everything in, and you'll see really low polygon models and low resolution textures, and things like NPCs walking around without heads. It's a shame too, because this really is a gorgeous looking game. The attention to detail with clothing, weapons and armor, the architecture and texture work for certain areas is just stunning. You'll notice how Henry's armor gets little dents and chinks too, depending on the condition it's in. Outside of the appearance though, it gets worse. NPCs frequently glitch out, getting stuck on top of each other. And speaking of getting stuck, it's not uncommon to get stuck on something as simple as a staircase. Even when you're horse riding, you'll often feel like every blade of grass is made out of concrete, and certain bushes may as well be brick walls. Every single time you begin dialogue with someone, you've got to wait for a 4 or 5 second long loading screen. Every single time. The worst part is when the game crashes during the loading screen, or heaven forbid when you're sleeping to save your progress and it crashes then. I mean, this has happened to me multiple times. Quests are often extremely bugged, like NPCs just don't show up where they're supposed to be, the next stage of a quest won't activate, and etc. Combine that with a crappy autosave system and you're looking at replaying large sections over and over. I mean, it's just not very enjoyable. And I've even read that some people have had their save files corrupted after 40 or 50 hours of game time.
It's shit.
This is where the love it or hate it thing comes into play, and if you read what people are saying about this game online, they're either saying it's brilliant or saying it's the worst game of all time. At the end of the day though, for me, Kingdom Come's been a bumpy ride, but you know what? Overall, it's been a satisfying one. The journey my Henry made from being the good-for-nothing son of a blacksmith who gets into fistfights and chases tail turned him into a plate-wearing master swordsman, with a silver tongue and a penchant for killing bandits and Cumans. Kingdom Come requires a lot from the player. It has a really slow start, and even when it gets going, it often trips and stumbles. It's got technical issues coming out of its European arse, but when everything works properly, seldom as that may be, there really is nothing quite like it. This game has the potential to be a masterpiece, but right now it's like looking at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and the paint's all wet and the scaffolding's still up. But there is still definitely a good game here, just buried under the myriad of problems and issues. The question remains, Sonny Jim, can you be bothered to put up with all this crap and enjoy the other aspects of the game? And that's the question everyone has to answer before playing. But then again, no one ever said being a knight would be easy.